what was in the beginning with God? John 1:1 never says, in the beginning was the Son, and the Son was with God, and the Son was God. The text reads, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The more literal Greek order is, and God was the Word. If we do not assume that the Word, which is the Greek logos, the expressed thought, is another God beside the Father, then John 1:2 should be translated as it or this was in the beginning with God, rather than he was in the beginning with God. For the Son of God was with the Father only in God's expressed thought within his logos before having a beginning by his begetting. Trinitarian scholars have had a great influence on the vast majority of Bible translations that we have today. Just as scientists who believe in evolution often use their personal bias when interpreting the facts of science, so Trinitarian scholars have often used their personal bias in the various translations we have today. In the 16th century, William Tyndale, being a Greek scholar, translated the first English Bible directly from the Greek texts, Erasmus's Greek text. Prior to Tyndale, all English New Testaments were translated from the Latin Vulgate. William Tyndale translated John 1:2-3 as it was in the beginning with God, referencing the Logos in John 1:1. Now we must remember that William Tyndale was translating from the Greek text of Erasmus, not from the Latin Vulgate. And he translated the Greek text as it was in the beginning with God, rather than he who was in the beginning with God. Why did Tyndale translate the first English Bible directly from the Greek text as it was in the beginning with God, rather than he who was in the beginning with God? Tyndale translated the Greek pronouns hotos and autos as it because nothing in the text of John 1:1 states that the Logos of God existed as a personal he before the incarnation actually occurred. Scholar Bart D. Ehrman exposed Trinitarian influence in Bible translations when he said, Erasmus, who produced the first Greek New Testament without the Trinity in 1516, was forced by the priests, the Catholic priests, to put the Trinity in a new edition that was later translated into the King James Version of the Bible. Tyndale had originally translated 1 John 1:2-4 as it was in the beginning with God. But later, Trinitarian influence caused the King James Version to read, he was in the beginning with God. The Greek pronouns hotos and autos are usually translated as this or it throughout the New Testament, unless the context indicates that a person is in view. For example, John 6:60 says, therefore many of his disciples, when they heard this, auto, said, this is a difficult saying. Who can hear it? So the Greek text uses the pronouns autos and hotos in conjunction with the logos, the expressed thought. And the text reads, therefore many of his disciples, when they heard this, said, this is a difficult saying, who can hear it? It is hard to imagine that John 6:60 could be translated as he or him in relation to the logos, the saying of Jesus, rather than this or it. For then the text would read, therefore many of his disciples, when they heard him, said, he is a difficult saying, who can hear him? He is a difficult saying? Obviously, the sayings of Jesus could not be a distinct person beside himself, nor could the sayings or the words of Jesus actually be Jesus himself. Therefore, the Trinitarian translators could not identify Jesus as the Logos, as the saying, so they translated the text as this and it in relation to the Logos, rather than a he or a him in relation to the Logos. The same logical principle should also apply in John chapter 1, verses 1 to 3, because the text says nothing of a distinct God the Word person distinct from God the Father. John 1, 1 to 3 says, "In the beginning was the Word, the Logos, and the Word, the Logos, was with God." Pros ton theon. Pros ton theon means pertaining to God, according to Hebrews 2:17 and Hebrews 5:1. The exact words pros ton theon are translated in most translations as relating to or pertaining to God. So we must understand that the Word, the Logos, the express thought of God that was with God, was with him in the sense of pertaining to himself, because that's what pros ton theon means. So in the beginning was the Word, the express thought of God, and the express thought, Logos, was pros ton theon, was with God in relation to pertaining to God, and God was the Logos. The proper Greek word order is, and God was the Logos. God was the express thought. And then it goes on to say in John 1, 2, and 3, Hotos, this was with God in the beginning. All things came to be through Hotos, this it, and apart from Auto or Autos, this it, not one thing has come to be that has come to be. Now, if we do not assume that Logos is a person, we would naturally, Greek scholars would naturally translate Hotos and Autos as this or it was in the beginning with God, rather than he who was in the beginning with God, because Logos in and of itself does not mean a person. Since John 1:1 does not expressly mean a person, it just says Logos. It doesn't say in the beginning was the Son, and the Son was with God. Well, then we could certainly translate Hotos and Autos in John 1, 2, and 3 as he was in the beginning with God. But no, Hotos and Autos, in the context of John 1, 1 through 3, proves that the Logos is the express thought of the only true God, the Father. Therefore, this, or it, was in the beginning with God. The Apostle John clarified what he meant about the Logos, the express thought of God, in his first epistle, 1 John 1:1, which reads, "That which was from the beginning." He didn't say he who was from the beginning. He didn't say the Son which was from the beginning. He said that was which was from the beginning, rather than he was from the beginning. Therefore, the Word, the Logos, the express thought which was with the Father, was not yet a personal childborn and Son given before the incarnation, before his virgin conception and birth. John 1, 1 through 3 says nothing about a person actually being with another God person. The text in verse 2 simply states that the Logos, the Word, was with God in the beginning. Logos means the express thought of God, was with God in the beginning. The natural reading of the text in verse 3 simply states that all things were created through the Logos, through the expressed thought of God, listed in verse 1, which would naturally be interpreted as the Father's word, the Father's expressed thought, which pertains to himself. For Psalm 33:6 says, "By the word of Yahweh were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth." We find that the word proceeds from the breath of the Father's mouth. So the express thought of the Father was with him because God the Father breathed his express plan for all human ages before the world began. Isaiah 41:4 says, "Who has performed and accomplished it, calling forth the generations from the beginning." God called forth in his expressed word, his expressed Logos, all human generations from the very beginning before they were literally created. So God had an express plan, his express thought, which was the express message of the gospel of Christ being the Lamb slain from the creation of the world, as Christ being the firstborn of all creation. That word was later made flesh to become the human child born and son given, who is God with us as a true man. Trinitarian scholars cannot show that the Greek word logos ever literally means a person within the pages of inspired Scripture. Since we cannot find a single example anywhere in the Greek New Testament to show that the word logos actually means a person, we should not assume that the Logos of John 1:1 is another distinct God person without the text actually saying so. Therefore, since Trinitarian Greek scholars should not have assumed that the Logos in John 1:1 was another God person with God, John 1:2-3 should properly be translated as it or this was in the beginning with God, rather than he was in the beginning with God. Now, oneness theologians don't have a problem in the sense of saying he was in the beginning with God, because we know that Jesus was with God in God's foreordained plan. In other words, Romans 4:17 says God calls the things that be not as though they already were. So we can also go with the translation he was in the beginning with God if we wanted to. It shouldn't literally be translated that, but we understand that Jesus was with the Father in God's prophetic mind and plan, just like Daniel chapter 7. We see that the Son of God came before the Ancient of Days, and it says, glory, power, dominion was given to him over all nations. We know that didn't actually come to pass in the time of Daniel, that Jesus did not literally have dominion over all nations, tribes, and languages of the earth, because in God's foreordained plan, God calls the things that be not as though they were. God already gave the dominion to his Son. God already spoke of his Son as if he already existed. Revelation 13:8, the Lamb which was slain before the creation of the world. So the Lamb was already slain in God's sight. The Son was already born. So in a sense, we could say the Son was already with God in God's foreordained plan without being a living, breathing Messiah. The Son was not literally a living Son before his birth at Bethlehem. He was conceived in the Virgin. That's when he became living, in his mother's womb. And that's where the origin of the Son begins. The Son did not have a literal beginning until he was conceived and born through the Hebrew Virgin. John 1:1 states that the Word, the Logos, was with God. With is from the Greek word pros. When the Apostle John wrote of a person who was literally with another person, he never used the Greek preposition pros as in John 1:1. Thus, when John wrote that the Word was with pros God, he was not saying that the Logos was an actual distinct person with God before the Logos was made flesh. If the Apostle John had meant that a person, the Son, was actually in view with another person, the Father, he would have used one of the two Greek prepositions, para or meta, meaning with. These are the words that he used elsewhere in his gospel narrative to describe a person actually being with another person. He always used the Greek prepositions para or meta for a person actually being with another person. But pros was never used for a person actually being with another person, because the Apostle John always used the Greek prepositions para or meta for persons being with persons. For example, in John 1:49 we read, they stayed with para, him, for the day. Okay, we have they, people, staying with him, a person, for the day. Greek preposition para. Here John used para for persons staying with para, another person. Likewise, in John 4:40 we read, they asked him to stay with para them. Here again we see that John regularly used the Greek word para for a person staying with para, other persons. He didn't use the word pros, he used para. Many other examples show that John always used the Greek words para or meta for a person actually being with another person or other persons. But we never find the Apostle John ever using pros, meaning with, for a person being with another person or other persons. For example, John 14:17 says, he remained with para you. John 14:25 says, these things I spoke to you while I was with para you. Again, John didn't use the word pros. He always used para or meta. He never used the Greek preposition pros for a person actually being with another person. John further employed the use of the Greek preposition meta, meaning with, throughout his gospel narrative for persons being with other persons. But he never employed the Greek preposition pros for people actually being with other people. For example, John 3:22 reads, "They stayed with meta him." Here we have they, people, staying with a person. Meta is used. John 3:25 says that John the Baptist's disciples had a discussion with meta, a Jew. So John's disciples were people, and they were with meta, a Jew. Again, we never find the Greek preposition pros. It's always para or meta. Never pros for persons actually being with other persons. So here again, the preposition meta is used for John's disciples having a discussion with a Jew about purification. If the Apostle John had meant, "In the beginning was the Son, and the Son was with the Father," he would have used one of the two Greek prepositions, para or meta, for a person actually being with another person. Since John used pros for God's logos, plan or purpose, being with pros God, he had to have meant that his foreknown plan or message was with himself, in the same way the Apostle Paul wrote that the gospel message was with pros the Galatians in Galatians 2:5. Galatians 2:5, and I quote, "So the truth of the gospel may stay with pros you." Notice, it is not a person being with the Galatians. It is the truth of the gospel message. Not a person, but the gospel message may stay pros with you. The Apostle Paul did not use para or meta because pros normally means with as far as a message. The message was with the Galatian Christians, not another person. Now, I would point out that the Apostle John never, ever used the Greek preposition pros for a person being with a person in his gospel narrative, nor in his epistles, nor in the apocalypse of the book of Revelation. In a similar way that the Apostle John used the logos for the predestined message, which was pros with God in John 1:1, so Paul the Apostle used the Greek preposition pros with the personal pronoun hymus to show that the truth of the gospel, the message, may stay with pros you, thus proving that the Greek grammar in John 1:1 does not prove that the Greek word logos means a distinct person until that word, that logos, was made flesh to become a personal child born and son given. For the distinction between the Father and the Son is an ontological distinction only because it occurred at a specific point in time in human history. For our only true God the Father was able to retain his unchangeable divine attributes in the heavens as the one God and Father, while he simultaneously became a distinct human person as a true man, a true son, through the Hebrew Virgin. John 1:10 shows that the Son was in the world, and the world was created by him as God before he became a son. The text says, John 1:10, "He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world did not know him." Just as a skilled carpenter could say that he was in the house, and the house was made alone and by himself, or by him, so John 1:10 can say that Jesus, as the one Father, who created all things, alone and by himself, was in the world as the incarnation of that only true God the Father with us as a true man. For the world was made by him as God before also becoming a true man. For just as a man can say that he built a house by his own power and through his own skills as a carpenter, without implying that he built the house as an agent, So God the Father created all things by himself and through himself, through his own word and his own invisible hands. Since God had prophetically spoke as if the Son was already in existence in his prophetic logos, in God's mind and thought, the Son can be said to be pros, with God, in his own mind and plan without literally existing with him as a living Son. For example, Psalm 2:7 says, God the Father said, "You are my Son, this day have I begotten you," as if it already happened. In God's mind, the Son was already begotten as a Son before he literally became the Son through his own begetting. God was able to say, "This day have I begotten you," because Romans 4:17 states that God calls the things which be not as though they already were. So we can see that God spoke of the Son as if he already was born. God spoke of the Son as if he was already slain, the Lamb slain from the creation of the world, Revelation 13:8. Thayer's Greek lexicon states that logos means those things which are put together in thought, as of those which, having been thought, gathered together in the mind, are expressed in words. Accordingly, a twofold use of the term is to be distinguished, one which relates to speaking and one which relates to thinking. Since the Greek word logos literally means the expressed thought that comes from a person's mind, it is reasonable to believe that the Son was already with the Father in God's prophetic mind and plan before the world was actually created. The Interpreter's Dictionary, Volume 4, pages 870 through 871, proves that the Word of God in the Hebrew and Greek texts can be interpreted to describe God's whole plan and purpose for mankind. And I quote, "The Word of God is used of God's revealed will or his whole plan and purpose for mankind." End quote. The only way to harmonize all of the scriptural data is to believe that the Word, the Logos of God, existed with the Father before the incarnation as his own impersonal, expressed mind and plan for the ages of humanity, and that the human child born and Son given was the central part of that plan that was made flesh in John 1:14. For more videos like this one, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel or visit us on the web at apostolicchristianfaith.com. God bless.